Hello again, and welcome to Aviation News Talk, where we talk general aviation with relevant news and flying tips for pilots and student pilots to help keep you safe. I'm Max Trescott, the author of several books on the Garmin G1000, 3000, 5000, and Perspective Glass cockpits, and the 2008 National Flight Instructor of the Year. Today I'll be talking about what you need to know about TIS, TAS, and Adsb traffic systems. And we have great news that the G100 UL unleaded fuel has just been approved by the FAA. Last week in episode 244, we talked with Dr. Dylan Caldwell about things you should do before going to your FAA flight physical. So if you didn't hear that episode, you may want to check it out at aviationnewstalk.com/244. And yes, this is a listener-supported show. That means you support the show, not advertisers. So think about what it's worth to you to learn just one thing today that might save your life. And then sign up to become a member and support the show financially at aviationnewstalk.com/awesome. And when you do, I'll read your name on the show. This week in the news, 2 airline pilots are under investigation for a mid-air fight. Aircraft deliveries in the second quarter were up, and we have a very clever controller quip to a C-17 pilot. All this and more, and the news starts now. From GAMI.com and AOPA.org, big news that G100 UL fuel has been approved. General Aviation Modifications, Inc., or GAMI, is pleased to announce that they have received the FAA's approval of the expansion of their supplemental type certificates on the use of G100 UL high-octane unleaded avgas. The approved model list, or AML, now covers every spark ignition piston engine and every airframe using a spark ignition piston engine in the FAA type certificate database, which means, yes, every airplane in the sky with a piston engine is now allowed to use G100 UL. George Brawley, GAMI's co-founder and head of engineering, said, quote, "We've been told by the FAA that this is the most thorough tested and documented STC that has ever been done at the Wichita Aircraft Certification Office." And he then lists some of the advantages that G100 has over today's 100 low lead. Number 1, in addition to having no lead, the fuel has equivalent octane performance and can work in even the most demanding high compression ratio and turbocharged engines. 2, the G100 UL has no scavenging agents and as such burns exceedingly clean, similar to today's unleaded auto fuels. This results in exceptionally clean combustion, free of deposits, and materially improves maintenance headaches like frequent oil and spark plug changes required with today's leaded fuel. 3, it's fully fungible with 100 low lead in any proportion without loss of properties and approved as such in the wing of an airplane. 4, being petroleum-based, the G100 UL can be produced at a large number of refineries or specialty chemical production facilities, improving the logistics of delivering this aviation gasoline through the existing infrastructure. And finally, operationally, the G100 UL is virtually identical to 100 low lead and actually has a bit more energy, or BTUs per gallon, for increased range of the aircraft. And from the AOPA story, they quote George Brawley saying, "This is a big day for the industry. It means that for a lot of our GA communities, and especially for a high fraction on the West Coast, relief is on the way. And it means that our industry will be able to go into the future and prosper and provide the essential infrastructure for this country for everything from angel flights to critical training of our future airline pilots." Brawley thanks AOPA and GA community for their support throughout the long process. "Without it, we couldn't have gotten this done," he said. The timing for when G100 UL will reach airports is still uncertain. It's going to take a while to manage the infrastructure, including manufacturing and distributing, Brawley said. The supply chain is still a, quote, very wounded infrastructure, and that's not going to make the process any easier, but we have a handle on how to do this, and with the support of the major players, I think we can do that. It's going to be limited to begin with, but it can be ramped up rapidly, he said. While the cost of the fuel has not been determined, Brawley said that the small batch production process will initially earmark the arrival of G100 UL at airports means that fuel will cost slightly more than leaded avgas. Small volume batches cost money, he said. Until we can get production revved up that we're making millions of gallons at a time, there will be an incremental cost, he said. And while they may pay a little more at the pumps, owners can expect to see engines that operate more efficiently. "I think the days of cleaning spark plugs every 50 hours are going to be behind us for good," Brawley said. And if you want to know more about G100 UL, I interviewed George Brawley back in episode 222, and you can find it online at aviationnewstalk.com/222. From ReporterHerald.com, that's a newspaper in Colorado, certification of remote tower at Loveland Airport still years away. The FAA is continuing to conduct the certification process of a first-of-its-kind remote air traffic control tower at the Northern Colorado Regional Airport in Loveland. A process airport manager, Jason Lycon, says could take as long as 3 years. The FAA, through vendor Cirrus Technologies, quote, began testing of the system in April and May, Lycon said. Timing is going on actively. We had hoped to be way ahead of this by now, but the pandemic didn't let the FAA travel out here, and that set us back quite a bit. We're glad to be back on track now. Allegiant Air had served the airport with passenger service starting in 2003, but suspended flights in 2012 and has not returned, citing the lack of an operational air traffic control tower. Cirrus Technologies, based in Ontario, is testing a remote tower system it says is one of the first in the world to integrate both video and radar to provide a comprehensive view of the airport's surface and surrounding airspace to air traffic controllers working in a remote facility. The typical out-the-window view from a control tower is replicated by an array of cameras that provide a 360-degree view of the maneuvering area and airspace close to the airport, the company said. This is augmented by 2 further masts located close to each of the main runway thresholds. These masts provide panoramic views of the thresholds as well as zoom views of the final approach path, enabling the controllers to have an enhanced observation of these critical areas. Also installed will be cameras that could pan, tilt, and zoom to replicate the binocular function required in a tower. The remote tower was set up at the Loveland Airport in November 2018, but sat idle for years during the COVID-19 pandemic while waiting the testing and certification process to begin. Phase 1 of the certification process, in which the FAA assessed the remote tower's functional capability, was completed last spring. Now in Phase 2, the remote tower is serving as a primary controller of air traffic with a mobile tower as a backup. And I know of at least 2 other airports in the U.S. that are testing these remote towers, one airport in Virginia and one in Alabama. So it's going to be interesting to see how this changes air traffic control in the future. From AOPA.org, Companion Copilot Video Series released. The Companion Copilot Video Series provides frequent companion passengers who are not pilots an opportunity to learn more about how they can pinch hit and help their pilot and enjoy being an active participant in the flight. The series covers pre-flight tasks, simple aerodynamic concepts, navigation and communication considerations, checklist use, and emergency procedures. Non-pilot passengers will learn how they can help with the pre-flight, route planning, navigation, and radio communications. They'll come away with a greater understanding of how airplanes fly and be better prepared to enjoy the flight, knowing that they can be of help using fundamental concepts reviewed in the videos. There are 5 videos in the series, and they're free. For example, Episode 5 explains what to do in an emergency, such as an engine or other system failure. It discusses how flying companions can pinch hit to help you as the pilot with emergency checklists and talking with ATC. And I'll include a link to these videos in the show notes. Also, I should mention that many 99s chapters around the country provide flying companion seminars. For example, our local chapter, the Santa Clara Valley 99s, has their next flying companion seminar scheduled for Saturday, November 5th, 2022, at the Reed Hillview Airport. And you can find out more about it at santaclara99s.org. And if you contact them, tell them you heard about their seminar on Aviation News Talk. From paddleyourown.canoe.com, Air France confirms that 2 pilots are under investigation for a mid-flight brawl in the cockpit. A spokesperson for Air France has confirmed that a captain and first officer have been suspended and are under investigation for, quote, totally inappropriate behavior, in which the 2 pilots allegedly became involved in a mid-flight physical altercation in the cockpit. According to a report leaked by the French daily newspaper La Tribune, cabin crew heard the 2 pilots fighting through the cockpit door and had to enter the flight deck to separate the 2. One of the flight attendants then remained on the flight deck for the remainder of the flight to prevent the pilots from fighting again. It remains unclear what caused the pilots to fall out on such a spectacular level during the flight in June 2022. A spokesperson for Air France noted that the flight continued without further incident and landed safely. The captain and first officer are not flying, pending the outcome of an internal investigation. The revelation, however, comes just days after France's National Aviation Accident Agency publicized a highly critical report of the just safety culture amongst Air France pilots. The report from the BEA concluded that there is a certain culture among some Air France crews which encourages a propensity to underestimate the extent to which strict compliance with procedures contributes to safety. From avweb.com, 2022 mid-year aircraft deliveries up across most segments. Aircraft deliveries have increased across most segments for the first 6 months of 2022 compared to the same time period last year, according to the second quarter 2022 General Aviation Aircraft Shipment and Billing Report released by the General Aviation Manufacturers Association, or GAMI. GAMI reported that overall airplane shipments through the second quarter of the year rose 9.9%, and total helicopter deliveries remained steady with a 0.6% increase. Total airplane billings rose from $8.6 billion at the end of Q2 2021 to $9.1 billion at mid-year in 2022, while total helicopter billings dropped from $1.4 billion to $1.3 billion. Compared to the first half of 2021, piston airplane deliveries have increased 9.4% to 638 units. Turboprops were up 11.8% to 247 units, and business jet shipments rose 9.5% with 289 shipped. So far this year, 87 piston helicopters have been delivered, up from 83 units through Q2 of 2021. Turbine helicopters, the only segment to show a decrease, dropped slightly from 259 to 257 aircraft delivered. From GeneralAviationNews.com, a free app could increase DPE availability by 20%. DPE, of course, refers to the examiners who give check rides. The Society of Aviation and Flight Educators, or SAFE, is offering its free SAFE Toolkit app to all flight instructors and pilots. Use of the app by Cfi'S could increase DPE check ride availability by as much as 20%, according to SAFE officials. DPE availability has become a crisis in the last several years, despite efforts by the FAA and the flight training industry to improve scheduling for pilot practical tests, SAFE officials noted. Part of the problem was discovered during a meeting of 35 senior DPEs and FAA officials at the EAA AirVenture Oshkosh 2022, association officials said. The consensus was that about 1 in 5 FAA practical tests fail to even start due to the applicant's inadequate experience or endorsements. SAFE officials call the 20% non-start rate abhorrent, especially with the critical scheduling problems plaguing flight schools and independent Cfi'S seeking a DPE for their students. Quote, a DPE cannot legally accept the IACRA 8710 and begin a certification activity unless all the applicant's experience and endorsements are correct and meet the regulatory standards, said David St. George, SAFE Executive Director. We are wasting 20% of check ride opportunities, and that's insane. The SAFE Toolkit, which works with both Apple and Android devices, provides all the required pilot experience, such as landings and flight hours, necessary for all the FAA certificates and ratings. It also contains the FAA-approved 61.65 endorsements and ACS and PTS FAR 61.39 test codes that must be endorsed for each flight test. In addition, the app includes a link to the SAFE blog Checkride Ready, which allows Cfi'S and pilot applicants to directly access information on avoiding a non-start flight test. Checkride Ready reveals key problem areas seen by DPEs that result in nervousness, aggravation, and sometimes an unsuccessful outcome, SAFE officials said. Another link for applicants in the free SAFE Toolkit is overcoming flight test anxiety, a big cause of failures once an evaluation has begun. Quote, the real casualties of these CFI errors are the scheduling test applicants preparing and suffering test anxieties, but never getting an opportunity to demonstrate their abilities, said St. George, who wrote the app for SAFE members 7 years ago. Since most DPEs charge for traveling and showing up, there is a financial hit for applicants as well. And from dailymail.co.uk, this is a story sent to me by a mega supporter Vic Bajaj. Floatplane pilot with 7 passengers nearly collides with boat during dangerous maneuvers in Alaska. Footage shows the moment when a large boat in Alaska gets dangerously close to a floatplane in a bid to prevent it from taking off. The U.S. Coast Guard in Alaska said it was investigating Tuesday's incident in Halibut Cove with local authorities after video of the vessel intentionally circling around the plane went viral on social media. The floatplane's pilot, Eric Lee, described the incident as a dangerous maneuver and told several local news outlets that 7 passengers were on board the aircraft, although none of them were injured. Footage captioned Serious Road Rage on Instagram shows the gray boat agitating the water by repeatedly revolving around the taxiing plane, creating waves as both the vessel and floatplane made their way out of the bay. It remains unclear as to why the watercraft was trying to destabilize the plane and whether the pilot and the navigator knew each other, though it has been reported that the boat was being steered by a woman who remains unidentified. Austin McDaniel, a spokesman for the Alaska State Troopers, told Anchorage Daily News on Thursday that the agency has not issued any citations or carried out any arrest in relation to the incident. Lee, who owns Alaska Ultimate Safaris in Homer, said he was about to embark all 7 passengers on a sightseeing tour when the boat suddenly interrupted takeoff. The aluminum boat was coming toward me. I thought they were trying to get around me at first, the pilot told Alaska News Source. Then they started weaving back and forth fairly close to the aircraft. With little room to maneuver in the cove, Lee added that it would have been complicated to steer around the boat and that he was worried by the possibility of hitting it with his float plane. My concern level was high because she was, it appeared to be within inches, but more likely within feet of our wings, Lee said. Had she, at those speeds, hit our wings, I had just assumed it was going to be a catastrophe and we would have to evacuate. The pilot added that it would have been a nightmare scenario to evacuate all 7 passengers aboard in the middle of the cove. If the boat did actually hit me, how was I going to get them out of the aircraft and to safety, Lee added. Eventually another boat, however, emerged and pressured the woman navigating the vessel to stay clear of the float plane's path. She was identified as a local business owner. Lee was then able to resume takeoff and take his passengers on the sightseeing tour. He added that he didn't report the incident to local law enforcement, though the FAA and the Coast Guard have contacted him about it. The pilot added that he had never experienced an encounter similar to the one on Tuesday in his 20 years of flying. From GeneralAviationNews.com, this is an NTSB report called Sea Ray sinks after hitting away from a boat. The Sea Ray landed on a lake near League City, Texas, and then performed a step taxi into the wind. When the pilot applied full power to takeoff, the airplane hit away from a passing boat. When the airplane hit the second wave from the boat, the front of the airplane went underwater. The nose of the airplane was ripped off. With the engine still running, the airplane nosed over and filled with water. In his report, the pilot noted that he had not set the airplane's trim properly, and he failed to apply back pressure on the controls when he hit the boat wake. He also noted that there were no pre-impact mechanical failures or malfunctions that would have precluded normal operation. Probable cause, the pilot's failure to maintain airplane control during a water takeoff after an encounter with the wake from a boat. From GeneralAviationNews.com, first flight out of maintenance goes awry. Now, this is an ASRS report from NASA. They received reports from both the mechanic and the pilot, and I'll read the pilot's report. He says, quote, I arrived at the airport to fly my aircraft as it had come out of annual and also had its engine overhauled. Upon pre-flight inspection of the exterior and interior of the airplane, no discrepancy were discovered. All control surfaces moved freely. Upon engine run-up while performing the pre-takeoff checklist, all flight controls moved freely and in the correct manner. On takeoff, I recognized the stall warning horn and an abnormal pitch-up after rotation. I immediately provided full forward pressure on the stick and received no response. I proceeded to reduce power and add full forward trim, which lowered the nose of the aircraft. It became clear that the plane did not have elevator control. I proceeded to keep the engine in normal operating range, trim full forward, and circle back to the runway I had departed. I landed with the use of flaps and full aft trim to flare, leaving the stick full forward. The landing was uneventful. I taxied over to maintenance. Upon inspection of the aircraft, an elevator cable, which is connected at the base of the stick, was not connected. This cable and pulley is only visible when panels and other coverings are removed. From GeneralAviationNews.com, familiarization flight ends in crash. This comes from an NTSB report. The owner of the F-1 rocket had recently purchased the airplane, and a pilot had ferried the tailwheel-equipped tandem-seat airplane across the country and delivered it to him the day before the accident. The purpose of the accident flight was for the ferry pilot to familiarize the owner with the airplane's avionics. The owner was seated in the front seat, while the ferry pilot, who did not hold a Cfi certificate, was seated in the rear. The rear seat was equipped with a limited set of flight controls that included a control stick, rudder pedals, and throttle. The rear seat was not equipped to control the airplane's brakes. The pilots departed and flew to a nearby airport with a 4,000-foot long runway, where the owner flew an approach to landing that terminated in a go-around. The ferry pilot then demonstrated a touch-and-go landing. On the third approach attempt, the owner was unable to extend the airplane's flaps, so they aborted the approach to troubleshoot. The pilots were ultimately unable to extend the flaps and elected to return to the owner's home airport in Finleyville, Pennsylvania, and land on the 2,500-foot long runway there. When the ferry pilot initially attempted to land the airplane, it bounced during both attempts, and he aborted the landings. The owner said that during the final landing attempt, the ferry pilot approached the runway at a slightly faster speed and that the airplane landed long. The airplane continued down the runway with its tail in the air. The ferry pilot, unable to see the runway due to his vision being obstructed by his position in the rear seat, did not realize the airplane was approaching the end of the runway until the owner called out to him. The owner began applying the airplane's brakes with about 400 feet of runway remaining. The airplane overran the departure end of the runway. During the excursion, both main landing gear collapsed, and the forward portion of the fuselage and engine mount area were substantially damaged. Following the accident, an FAA inspector turned on the master switch and extended the airplane's flaps. The flaps extended normally. Probable cause: the pilot's misjudgment of the airplane's speed and altitude during the landing approach, and his failure to attain the proper touchdown point during landing, which resulted in a runway overrun. Contributing to the accident were his access to a limited set of flight controls, his obstructed vision due to his seating position, and the pilot's decision to return to the relatively constrained runway following a perceived anomaly of the airplane's flaps. And finally, from avweb.com, we have this report of an ATC conversation that occurred in Southern California. Somebody wrote in and said, "I fly in the high desert of Southern California. We often have very strong gusty winds. While practicing approaches, I heard this interaction between Tower and a C-17 crew also practicing. Tower, wind 200 at 25, gusting to 37, cleared for the option runway 17. C-17 pilot, after acknowledging information, does the wind always blow like this? Tower, no. Sometimes it blows hard." That's the news for this week. Coming up next, a few of my updates. And then we'll talk about what you need to know about TIS, TAS, and Adsb traffic systems. All right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. And now for a few updates. First, I don't have any news of people who've passed check rides. If I missed an email from you about a check ride you passed, please send it to me again. And of course, would love to share all of your accomplishments for check rides here with listeners. Just send them to me by going to aviationnewstalk.com and clicking Contact at the top of the page. Now, let me tell you a little bit about what I've been up to. I've had just an incredibly busy flying schedule for the last month or two, flying sometimes 2 and 3 flight lessons a day. And the only way I was able to get this episode out this week is that I had 2 cancellations late in the week, which gave me some time to work on the show. And I've also been busy with trips. I flew out to Knoxville about 10 days ago to bring back a brand new Vision Jet and its owner to the West Coast. The trip took 3 days total, 1 day to fly out to Knoxville commercially, and then 2 days to come back. On the commercial flight, I did something I haven't done before, which worked out extremely well. There are no nonstop flights from the West Coast to Knoxville, so traditionally I've had to change planes somewhere and then take a second flight from a hub to Knoxville. Most of the time I've changed planes in Dallas-Fort Worth, but on various trips I've also connected through Denver, Atlanta, and Charlotte to get to Knoxville. And probably about half the time my flight gets in late, sometimes well after midnight. And unfortunately, that results in a short night as I have to be up typically before 7 a.m. to get to the Cirrus Vision Center to meet a client. And as you know, the airlines are having a particularly difficult time meeting their schedules this summer, with many canceled and delayed flights. So I was worried about having a connecting flight on this trip. So I decided to try something different, which was to take the one and only nonstop flight a day that flies from SFO to Nashville. That was a very quick and pleasant flight. From there, I picked up a rental car and drove to Knoxville. Surprisingly, from the time the wheels touched down on the flight to the time I was in the rental car was just 20 minutes. And from Nashville, it was a very pleasant 2.5-hour drive. And best of all, about 98% of the driving was on interstate, so it was a very easy drive. And it was really quite beautiful driving through the low hills and forests as I crossed the state of Tennessee. Best of all, I arrived a little after 9:30 p.m., which was a couple of hours earlier than many of my commercial flights get into Knoxville. So I think I'll do that as often as possible in the future. Though unfortunately, before I came up with this idea, I had already booked connecting flights for my October trip to Knoxville to do my annual Vision Jet recurrent training. So I'm going to cross my fingers and hope that connecting flight goes well. Speaking of the Vision Jet, I've had a number of flights recently with various people on the West Coast for various reasons. Most of them were pilots looking to get some recurrent training. In 2 cases, it was for pilots who hadn't flown the jet in a number of months. And in another case, it was for a pilot who wanted to get some brush-up training before he went to Knoxville for his annual recurrent training. On this last trip coming back from Knoxville, it took us 2 days to get back as there were delays in the paperwork to register the aircraft, so we didn't get started until about 4 p.m. We made our first stop in Bentonville, Arkansas, which is the airport where Walmart keeps its fleet of aircraft. Interestingly, the FBO there is owned by Walmart, and inside they have a 1940s air coupe suspended from the ceiling with a sign that says that was the type of aircraft that Walmart founder Sam Walton used to fly. While we were there, someone said that Walmart now has a fleet of about 20 Learjets that they fly in business. Our next stop was Amarillo, where we stayed overnight. The FBO there, which I've stopped at numerous times over the years, was recently remodeled and looked great. Along the way home, we stopped at McCarran Airport in Las Vegas. It was about 96 degrees when we arrived and over 100 degrees when we departed. While we were there, we visited a friend of the VisionJet owner who works at a Part 91 operation that operates several jets for a local company. We visited the hangar and I got to climb aboard the Gulfstream 4 that they have. It's really nice inside, seats 14 people, and the pilot said that they can fly it nonstop from Las Vegas to St. Martin in the Caribbean, which sounds like a fabulous flight. Departing Las Vegas, we were happy to have the latest G2 Plus version of the VisionJet, as it has a higher fuel flow and better climb rate for takeoff, which came in handy as we climbed out of Las Vegas on a very hot day. So overall, a great trip, and I'll be flying more with that owner soon. Other trips, it looks like I'll be headed out to New Jersey sometime in the next couple of weeks to bring a Turbo 206 back with its new owner to California. I used to live in New Jersey many, many years ago before I moved out to the West Coast, so I'm looking forward to visiting some places where I've been in the past, so that should be a fun trip. And of course, I'm doing lots of teaching in our 2022 SR20, and I've also been teaching the multi-engine rating to pilots in our 2021 DA42-6. So if you'd like to fly with me in either of those planes, please contact me. I've had a couple of flights recently to Hollister in the SR20. That's down near Watsonville. Yesterday when we were in the pattern, one of the CAL FIRE OV-10 Broncos reported that it was entering on the 45 as we were on the downwind for runway 31. I looked at it on the traffic display and was surprised to see that it was still doing 195 knots as it was about 4 miles out on the 45. As the aircraft got closer, it must have realized that it was a little too fast and too close to follow us on the downwind to 3-1. So with the recent Watsonville mid-air collision in mind, I told the pilot that we would extend our downwind so that it could land in front of us. The pilot thanked us and made a short approach to 3-1. At one point, we widened our downwind out to make even more room for the pilot. Interestingly, we never saw the OV-10 until we were on final and saw it taxiing back to the base. We relied on our traffic map page to determine that the Bronco was closing in fast on us and that we probably didn't want to force it to follow us on the downwind to runway 31. But the main reason I offered to extend our downwind and land behind the aircraft was because I know that the men and women who fly the CAL FIRE planes have hot, dirty jobs, and I am grateful that we have them to help fight the wildfires. And I figure that anything we can do as pilots to make their job just a little easier is a good thing. Now, I saw something recently on Reddit that was called Checkride Etiquette for Cfi'S ? And the poster wrote, "A relatively new CFI here. Any tips or advice to make a check ride easier for the applicant in DPE? I was waiting in the FBO while my student was on their oral, and the DPE made a scene that I didn't top off the airplane while the oral was being conducted. The plane had 25 gallons in it." And that's all they posted. Some of the comments, boy, they were pretty good. Here's what one CFI wrote. He wrote, "I try to stay as far away as possible while still being close enough to fix any paperwork I inevitably screw up." And yeah, that's certainly common on check rides. And so one thing you may want to do is, just as a CFI, forward all of your endorsements to the DPE a day or two before the check ride so that they have time to look over them and can let you know ahead of time if there's a deficiency in your paperwork. Another CFI said, "Yep, somewhere in the building, but far enough away to give them privacy." Someone wrote, "That TPE sounds like someone you might not want to use in the future." Totally. And someone else wrote, "Why the heck is topping the plane off your responsibility? You're going to do your student's fuel loads after he gets his license and he's PIC? It's his decision to make about how much he wants." And someone else wrote, "You're not wrong at all. However, I'd rather take the heat where I can if it means less dings against my students just to get them through a check ride. We all know busts are often death by 1,000 cuts, so I'll take one on the chin if I can. That said, you're totally right." Now, I thought that was really a very interesting comment. I'm going to keep that in mind in the future. So lots of comments. I'll go ahead and include a link in the show notes if you want to read more of the comments from that post. And here's an article I read recently on the Cleared for Takeoff blog. The Psychology of Flying is the subtitle. It's at cftblog.com. And the author, who is a clinical psychologist, had a blog post called License to Learn. And in part, buried down in the middle, he says, on its simplest level, the idea that the certificate is a license to learn just means that now that you've got your ticket, don't let it get to your head and turn into a hot shot. It has been said that an unexamined life is not a life worth living. In flying, it could be that an unexamined life could lead to a deadly lack of humility, because if you don't know where and how you can improve your flying, you won't know what you need to be better at, and well, you know the rest of the story. More importantly, you may have missed the unwritten disclaimer that ought to accompany every new certificate. Your plastic card should tell you that you have reached the point in your flying career where you know enough to know that you don't know everything there is to know. It's a master's degree in humility, a certificate of discernment, a license to learn. Great article, and I'll include a link to that in the show notes. And here's an email from Patreon supporter Eric Finley. He says, I'm a couple weeks behind on aviation news talk and heard you discussing the RV-10 accident north of the Bay Bridge. You mentioned that you'd never heard anyone ask for the coastline transition before. I just want to tell you that back in late June, I was flying from LLR, I think that's Little River, to Fullerton, and requested this transition, and it was granted at 5,500 feet. I wasn't handed off to the controlling sector, I forget who it was, until much later than I was comfortable with. If it had been denied, I either needed to quickly descend and fly under the shelves, or head west and go around Oakland, etc. In the end, it was not an issue, and it was a great route through the airspace. In regards to the following episode, clearly you must have a Plan B or Plan C. My Plan B was to fly along the coast under the Bravo, but if that was fogged in, my Plan C was to fly west and go around Oakland. The coast was clear all the way from Little River to Tomales Bay, but Half Moon Bay was reporting marginal VFR and then IFR, so I was about to scratch off Plan B. The weird part is that as I overflew Half Moon Bay, there wasn't a cloud or any fog to be seen. I have no idea what was up with the weather station there. Thanks for the awesome podcast. I've been a Patreon supporter for years, and I promise if my credit card expires that I'll renew. That's great. Thanks so much, Eric. Appreciate your support. And, of course, aviation is a very small community. Everybody knows everybody. See how many of these people that you know. These are the new supporters who signed up to become members to support the show in the past week. They include Ron Stubblefield at the $20 a month level, Richard Choate, also $20, Sam Kramer at $8, who I think I know. Hello, Sam. Anthony Della Chiaie at $20 a month. Byron Beerley edited his pledge up to $10 a month. Then Matt Page joined us at $35 a month, which gives him access to my online courses. We also had a one-time donation via PayPal from Roy, either Diamond or Diamond, I'm not sure which, $100. He says, Hi, Max. Thank you for all of your insight into flying. I received my ticket in 1981, flew 10 years and then took 20 years off, and have been flying the last 11 years. Passed my IFR written in the spring. Best regards, Roy. My thanks to Roy and to everyone who signed up to support the show, and this would be an awesome time for you to consider joining and becoming a member as well. As Eric mentioned about credit cards expiring, we just passed the first of the month, and I looked at it and couldn't believe it. Record number, 12 credit cards have expired. Historically, a relatively small percentage of those people go back in to update their credit card. Not really sure why. So we need about 12 new supporters just to get back even again. So if you would, please take a moment, head on out to aviationnewstalk.com/awesome. You can enter a credit card and select what dollar level per month you'd like to support the show. Or if you'd like to make a one-time donation, just head on out to aviationnewstalk.com/PayPal. And again, you can either use your credit card or PayPal account to make a one-time donation. Thanks so much for everyone who supports the show in whatever way you do, whether it's through your emails, leaving 5-star reviews on your podcast app, or joining as a member to support the show. Coming up next, we're going to be talking about traffic systems, all right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. Let's talk about what you need to know about the traffic systems commonly found in GA aircraft and the differences between them. Now, if like me, you fly in a busy area, then traffic systems are essential for helping to keep you safe. Now, I decided to talk about this as earlier this week, I did a phase check for a new CFI, and while he was very knowledgeable about the Cirrus that we flew, he knew surprisingly little about traffic systems. Yet there's a big difference in how these systems work, so I thought we'd talk about it today. Most of what I'll talk about is based on my experience flying behind glass cockpit systems such as the G1000 and Perspective, but these traffic systems can also be installed as standalone boxes in virtually any aircraft. So regardless of the aircraft you fly, you may come across these systems. If there is no traffic system installed in an aircraft you fly, you can still bring along a portable traffic system. However, I'll be talking today about the installed systems and not about portable systems. The three major systems we'll be talking about are Traffic Information Service, or TIS, Traffic Advisory Systems, or TAS, TAS, and Adsb systems, and we'll talk about them in that order. And a lot of what I say comes straight from my Max Truscott's G1000 and Perspective Glass Cockpit Handbook. If you fly a Garmin G1000 or a Cirrus Perspective Glass Cockpit, you've probably figured out that it's a lot like Microsoft Word. Most of us only use 5% of its features, but if we took the time to learn it in depth, we'd get a lot more out of it. My book teaches you what you need to know about the Garmin G1000 and Perspective to get the most out of these systems. So instead of just using 5% of the features, call now to get a copy at 800-247-6553. You'll pay $34.95 plus shipping, or just go into the show notes for this episode and you'll find a link where you can order any of my books online. If you'd like an autographed copy, just sign up on Patreon at the $50 a month level, and after you've been a member for 2 months, I'll mail you a signed copy of the book. To sign up on Patreon, just go to aviationnewstalk.com/awesome. If you fly a glass cockpit aircraft, you're probably familiar with the traffic map page. What you may not realize is that that page can be connected to either a TIS, TAS, or Adsb system, or in some cases, more than one of these systems. And if an aircraft is unfamiliar to you, you won't know which of these three systems is installed in any particular aircraft. So it pays to know the different traffic symbols so you can figure out which type of traffic system is installed in each of the aircraft that you fly, and so you can understand the limitations of each system. Now, TIS is the least expensive option, and it's the one you're most likely to find in a Cessna 172 equipped with a Garmin G1000. Since TIS data comes from FAA radar, the targets it presents on the traffic map are generally more accurate than those from the more expensive TAS systems. The downside of TIS is that it's only available when flying within about 55 miles of about 100 radar sites, which means there are vast areas of the U.S. with no TIS data. In Cessna 182s, it's not uncommon to find the more expensive TAS systems, which work anywhere since they don't need ground radar for data, but instead they actively ping other aircraft around them to locate these aircraft. If you're flying a Cirrus, most of those aircraft shipped with TAS systems, which we'll talk about later. TIS is enabled through the use of a Mode S transponder, so even if you don't have a glass cockpit aircraft, if you have a Mode S transponder, you have the capability to see traffic, provided your Mode S transponder is connected to some type of display. The most accurate of all the systems is Adsb, which we'll talk about last. In the G1000 in Perspective, the traffic map page is the second page in the map group, and you can reach it from the navigation map page by turning the small FMS knob one click. Two soft keys, Standby and Operate, alternate with each other. To display traffic, press the Operate soft key. Press the Standby soft key to disable oral alerts, such as when other aircraft in the pattern are generating just too many traffic alerts. Later software versions have a Flight ID key that lets you view flight information for some aircraft, such as their N number. When TIS is installed, the traffic map has three ranges: 2 miles, 6 miles, and 12 nautical miles. The ranges are selected by rotating the range knob, which is combined with a joystick. To see all traffic transmitted through TIS, you need to be on the 12 nautical mile range. TIS transmits data on up to 8 aircraft within 7 miles horizontally, 3,500 feet above and 3,000 feet below your current position. It sends data on these intruder aircraft's position, altitude trend, and ground track. To be visible, however, these intruder aircraft must have an operating transponder and be within radar range. Unlike the TCAS systems used by the airlines, TIS only provides alerts. It does not recommend maneuvers for avoiding intruder aircraft. An alert is generated anytime an aircraft is within 1/2 mile horizontally or within 500 feet vertically. Alerts are also generated anytime an aircraft is projected to enter this area within the next 34 seconds. These alerts, called traffic advisories or TAs, are displayed on the traffic map page with a solid yellow circle. A half yellow circle on the outer range ring is used if the TA aircraft is beyond the current map range. Whenever a TA is generated, an audio alert, traffic, is heard through the audio panel. A yellow traffic annunciator appears on the PFD, and the inset map on the PFD is automatically enabled. Other traffic, which doesn't meet the criteria for a TA, is displayed as an open white diamond with a trend vector showing the aircraft's general direction of travel. The intruder's altitude deviation from your altitude is displayed in hundreds of feet. So, for example, if a traffic symbol says +02, that means the aircraft is 200 feet above your aircraft. Also, an altitude trend arrow pointing up or down is displayed if the aircraft is climbing or descending at greater than 500 feet per minute. Now, TIS has a number of limitations. First, TIS is only available within about 55 nautical miles of certain FAA approach radar systems. Depending upon your altitude and obstructions between your aircraft and the radar site, the actual distance at which you receive service may be less. Aircraft below you that are below the radar floor in your area will not show up. Also, if you fly directly over the radar site, you may lose TIS service since the maximum elevation of the radar is 34 degrees and there is a cone of silence directly above the radar site. Finally, the altitude encoder in your aircraft must be working so that altitude deviations between you and other aircraft can be calculated. If your altitude encoder is not working, TIS data will be suppressed and no traffic is displayed. The approach radar sweeps every 5 seconds and then transmits the TIS data on the next sweep. Thus, the data you receive in the cockpit is a minimum of 5 seconds old. In order to present the traffic in a real-time position, the TIS ground station uses an algorithm to predict intruder aircraft positions at the time you will receive the data to compensate for this delay. However, if the intruder aircraft is maneuvering, their bearing information, indicated by a white line showing their direction of travel, may be inaccurate, though the position and altitude data are still generally accurate. If you make a steep turn, TIS may generate a false target at your location and altitude. And seeing a TIS target materialize right next to you can cause a scare, but the false target will usually disappear within a few radar sweeps. Other errors can occur when a converging aircraft is on a course that crosses your course at a shallow angle. If either you or the intruder suddenly change course when you're within a quarter of a mile of each other, TIS will display the intruder on the opposite side of where it actually is. As your distance from the radar site increases, the accuracy of the system decreases. At these longer distances, TIS cannot accurately determine bearing and distance information for intruder aircraft that are close to you. Therefore, whenever you're more than 30 miles away from the radar site, TIS will display an intruder aircraft within 3/8 of a mile of your location, either directly in front of or behind you. This is to avoid the confusion that would arise if, for example, an intruder to your right were presented to your left on the display. Thus, at longer distances from the radar site, you should assume that any aircraft displayed next to your position could be up to 3/8 of a nautical mile away in any direction. Now let's talk about TIS status messages. If more than 6 seconds have elapsed since traffic information was updated, your MODES transponder has missed a radar sweep. The message age 006 appears in the lower left of the display to indicate the age of the data, and the timer begins to increment. Traffic coast also appears, indicating that the data is of reduced quality. After 12 seconds without an update, the traffic data is removed from the display, and the message traffic removed replaces the traffic coast message. Be aware that there may still be traffic in your vicinity, but it's no longer displayed. After more than 60 seconds have elapsed, the message unavailable or unavail is displayed, and the audio alert traffic unavailable is heard through the audio panel. A TA off-range message indicates that an intruder aircraft has been detected, but is not displayed since it's beyond the currently selected range on the traffic map page. This message is removed when the intruder is displayed within the selected range. No data, data failed and failed indicate potential problems with the system and that you should consult your authorized dealer for assistance. Now let's talk about the Traffic Awareness Systems, or TAS. If your aircraft includes both a MODES transponder and a TAS system, such as the Avidyne, which was formerly Ryan, a Garmin GTS 800 series, or the L3 Skywatch systems, the G1000 only displays the TAS data and not the TIS data on the traffic page. If the TAS system is not properly configured, the system displays only the TIS data. The capabilities of TAS systems vary by manufacturer and by model. The Skywatch HP system, for example, tracks up to 35 intruder aircraft out to 35 nautical miles and displays the 8 most threatening aircraft. The display range is selected by rotating the MFD's range knob. When using TAS, the traffic pages reach the same way as for TIS. It's the second page in the map group. In addition to the TA and PA traffic types displayed on TIS, TAS has a third category for other advisories. These are assigned to intruder aircraft within the selected vertical and horizontal range that have not yet generated a TA. A hollow white diamond with no vector attached is used to depict them. The same operate and standby soft keys used for TIS are used for TAS. When configured for TAS, however, the traffic page has some additional soft keys. An Alt mode soft key brings up additional keys, which allows you to select the vertical operating limits for the system. The soft keys, modes, and vertical display limits are below, which is the look-down mode, plus 2,700 feet to minus 9,900 feet of your aircraft. Normal mode, which is 2,700 feet up and 2,700 feet down of your aircraft. Above, which is the look-up mode, looks from minus 2,700 feet to 9,900 feet above your aircraft. And unrest, which is the unrestricted mode, which goes from plus and minus 9,900 feet of your aircraft, though that mode is only available for some TAS systems. So if you're using a TAS system, you should refer to your operating manuals to learn the details for your system. A third system found in many aircraft is Adsb-in. Adsb stands for Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast. It's automatic because, unlike a transponder, it broadcasts continuously, not just when interrogated by radar or a TCAS system. It is dependent since it relies on GPS information. It provides the same surveillance function as radar, but does so by broadcasting its position. There are two Adsb capabilities. Adsb out, the only one mandated by FAA rules, refers to an aircraft broadcasting its position and other information. Unfortunately, aircraft equipping with Adsb out will spend thousands and not really gain any new benefits. Owners can elect to also equip with Adsb in, which allows an aircraft to receive traffic information from other Adsb-equipped aircraft, surface vehicles, and FAA ground stations. One type of Adsb in equipment can also receive free in-cockpit weather information, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. Adsb isn't required everywhere. It's required to fly above 10,000 feet MSL, unless you're within 2,500 feet of the ground, and within 30 miles of some mostly Class B airports, and when flying under, above, or through Class B and Class C airspace. There is an exclusion related to flying within 30 miles of Class B airports for any aircraft not originally certificated with an engine-driven electrical system. A significant kludge in the FAA's Adsb architecture is that there are two standards for Adsb, 1090ES and 978 UAT, which operate on different frequencies. The upshot is that aircraft equipped with 1090ES cannot directly detect UAT-equipped aircraft and vice versa. Instead, they must rely on about 800 sets of cross-linked ground-based transceivers that rebroadcast all Adsb signals on both frequencies. This allows all Adsb-equipped aircraft, regardless of the frequency they use, to see each other, except when they are not within line of sight of a ground-based Adsb site. This can occur particularly at low altitudes, so pilots of all Adsb-equipped aircraft still need to look out the window to avoid other aircraft. In the U.S., aircraft flying above 18,000 feet are required to equip with 1090ES. Aircraft that remain below 18,000 feet can choose either 1090ES or 978 UAT. The 978 UAT will be attractive to some owners since it can display free weather data in the cockpit. Now, how did we get two Adsb standards? 978 UAT is technically a superior system since it has a faster megabit per second data transfer rate that can accommodate up to 500 aircraft simultaneously. However, the airlines weren't particularly interested in free weather, and they preferred a system compatible with other countries. There also may have been concerns that if all U.S. aircraft were equipped with 1090ES, this lower bandwidth system could have been saturated in large metro areas with many aircraft. Having a separate 978 UAT alternative offloads aircraft from the 1090ES standard by offering a carrot to users in the form of free weather. For Adsb out capability, you need a position source and a transmitter. A 1090ES solution could consist of a WAAS-capable GPS and a Mode S transponder. An Adsb in solution consists of an Adsb receiver and a display for viewing traffic. Adsb in traffic symbols are a little different from the TIS and TAS symbols. The symbols look like an arrowhead with a vector attached to the front of the arrowhead. In many Adsb in systems, the length of the vector indicates the relative speed of the aircraft. So fast aircraft have long vectors in front of them, and slow aircraft have short vectors in front of them. For aircraft that are close by, the symbol and its vector turns yellow, and a solid yellow circle surrounds the arrowhead. The Adsb systems used in Cirrus Perspective and in some other Garmin standalone units have what I think is a wonderful feature that lets you select the type of vector attached to the front of the Adsb traffic symbol. The two vector choices, which you choose between using soft keys on the MFD, are absolute and relative. The absolute vector shows you the direction that the other aircraft are pointed. Now, technically, it's not the heading of each aircraft, but it's the ground track of other aircraft, which is usually close to the heading, except when winds are strong. You'd think you'd want to know where other aircraft are pointed, but that's not what's important. The genius of the relative vector is that it computes the speed and path of other aircraft versus your speed and path, and it shows where the other aircraft will pass relative to your aircraft. For example, imagine you have a slow aircraft at your 2 o'clock position that's pointed in front of your aircraft. The absolute vector shows where the aircraft is pointed, so it shows that the other aircraft is likely to pass in front of your aircraft. But when you select the relative vector, it shows that the aircraft will pass behind you since it's slower than your aircraft. I always display the relative vector, and what I'm looking for is any of the vectors that cross over my aircraft on the display, because these are the aircraft that are on a collision course with my aircraft. So when I see a relative vector that comes really close to my aircraft, I want to make sure it's at least 500 feet above or below me, or I'll start to maneuver so that the aircraft passes a minimum of 1 mile away from me. And since the traffic map page has range rings surrounding my aircraft, I can easily see the distance an aircraft is projected to pass from my aircraft, provided I have the relative vector selected. Now, here's one important thing to know about all of the traffic systems we've discussed. The altitude shown for other aircraft relies on the accuracy of the blind encoder attached to the transponder in each of those aircraft. So if the altitude encoder in another aircraft is off by a few hundred feet, you might be hundreds of feet closer vertically to another aircraft than the altitude shown on your traffic display. And most pilots won't know if their altitude encoder is off by a couple of hundred feet. When you check in with ATC, you're required to give your altitude, and when you do, ATC checks that against the altitude for your aircraft on their display. If the altitude you report is 300 feet or more from what they see on their radar display, they are required to tell you to stop squawking altitude, because they don't want to see an inaccurate altitude on their display. So an aircraft with an altitude encoder that's off by 200 feet or less won't get mentioned, and pilots may be unaware that their encoder is off by 100 or 200 feet. Now imagine, for example, that your altitude encoder is off by minus 200 feet, and a nearby aircraft has an altitude encoder that's off by plus 200 feet. That creates a 400-foot difference. In that situation, your traffic display might show that the other aircraft is 400 feet above you, when in fact it's at the same altitude as you are. It's because of this possible inaccuracy that I considered an emergency to spot any aircraft that's displayed within 500 feet of my altitude and will pass close by. Because that aircraft might be very close to my altitude if one or both of our altitude encoders is sending an inaccurate altitude. If you can't spot another aircraft, the best way to separate yourself from that aircraft is to increase the difference in your altitudes. So if the aircraft is below you, climb now. If it's above you, descend. These days with traffic systems, I routinely make small heading and altitude changes for aircraft within about 10 miles that are headed toward me. That decreases the need for ATC to call traffic out to me. And when ATC does call out traffic, it's pretty rare that I haven't already seen the traffic on the traffic system before they call me. One of the reasons that the traffic systems work so well for me is that my airport is under a Class Bravo. So virtually every aircraft located at my airport and its surrounding airports is required to be equipped with Adsb out. So I'm seeing most of the traffic on my traffic system. However, when I get further from the metro area, in areas where Adsb is not required, there are some aircraft that won't show up on my traffic page because they stay outside of the Class C and Class B areas that require a transponder and Adsb. But if you live in a rural area far from any Class C or Class B airspace, there may be relatively few aircraft in your area equipped with transponders, and hence your traffic system won't display any of these aircraft. In summary, there are many different kinds of traffic systems, and I've just scratched the surface of these systems. If there's a traffic system in any of the aircraft that you fly, make it a priority now to find the manual for your traffic system and to learn everything you can about it. You don't really want to just understand 5% of the features of your system. Well, I hope you learned something from that. And if you can think of someone who you think might benefit from learning more about traffic systems, please forward this show on to them. The comment I got from the person I mentioned at the very beginning of the show who didn't know a lot about traffic systems said that he didn't think his CFI knew very much about them, which is why it probably wasn't taught well to him. And I want to thank everyone who contributes to the show. If you'd like to send me an email, just head out to aviationnewstalk.com, click on Contact at the top of the page. I'm a little behind in reading emails, but I will get to more of them here in future shows. And if you want to leave us a review, I've got some of these that I'll read on a future show. Just head on out to your podcast player that you're listening to us. You'll find a place where you can leave a review, leave a 5-star rating, and tell people why you like the show. So until next time, fly safely, have fun, and keep the blue side up.